Hi, everybody. My name is Gary Gomes. Uh, I'm a I'm a Vedic astrologer. I've been working out of New Bedford for the past 32 years. I've also served as president of the Council of Vedic Astrology, vice president of the Council of Vedic Astrology, and I've received training in astrology since formal training since my late 30s. And so if I've been doing it over 32 years, you can do the math and figure out how old I am. I'm also a Swami of the Temple of Kriya Yoga, and a Swami of the Temple of Kriya Yoga lineage. I've also been initiated into transcendental meditation, and I'm also have several academic degrees. Sociology, business, education. And let's see now. I've been interested in astrology for a long, long time, ever since I was a young boy, but never really felt it connected well enough with me until I was in my late 30s, and I had a Vedic astrology reading from Pandit Gar from India. And that was how I got interested in Vedic astrology. I'm here to talk about the planets and how they affect the world and your personal life. I'll be expanding that to talk about remedial measures in isolated segments. So subscribers will see what methods they've used in ancient India to remediate the planets. I'll also instruct people in the proper ways to do these measures. And these will be very simple. These will be stuff you can do at home. And there are more elaborate remedial measures, but essentially planetary astrology is based around the idea, or any kind of astrology is based around the idea that you're born into, you take your first breath at a certain point in time in which you were meant to incarnate. So essentially, if you have bad luck or good luck in a chart, is partially due to your actions, but partially due to the planetary influences which are kind of pushing you in that direction. One of the points in all forms of astrology is to figure out, number one, how to deal with those particular influences so they don't hurt you or that they give advantage to you, whichever is the case, sometimes both. And I also teach Vedic astrology. I also teach tarot. I also do readings. I'm also a Reiki master, and I've been a Reiki master since 1996, 1995. And I've also a duly initiated Shaivite Hindu. So I'm not all omniscient and omnipotent. I don't know everything. I don't have control over everything. But I can help you in terms of, let's say, what planetary energies are affecting you adversely and which planetary energies are helping you out. Sometimes the ones that are helping you out, you're not really aware of because they're doing it on a different level. They're doing it in terms of making you work harder or think more or holding you back from making a bad decision. So it's important in astrology not to view every setback as being a negative. Sometimes setbacks are positive. Sometimes advances they push you in directions you don't want to end up in. So I think that's one of the important lessons to learn in life. A lot of people get into astrology. Usually, people don't consult astrologers because their lives are going well. Let's put it that way. They may. So, there are a few unique individuals I've had consult me from that perspective, but it's usually people want to figure out, at the very least, if things are crazy, what's going on. And the most they say, they come in with a perspective of my life is horrible, I need to change it. And if they feel their life is horrible, yes, they're right, they do need to change it. And these are techniques that you can use to change your life. But any change takes effort, any change takes a change in behavior, any change takes a change in perspective. So you're not just going to magically go into a reading and all of a sudden say, well, that was easy. I just have to um, do X, Y, and Z. Most patterns, most behaviors that we end up in that cause us pain or cause us trouble are things we've been working on for a long, long time. Otherwise, they wouldn't be showing up. So essentially, if I can be a little bit um, straightforward with you, essentially you're getting what you ordered from the universe, and you can say, "No, I never ordered that. I don't want to be in this miserable situation." But basically, you can shift attention, you can shift emphasis, you can shift perspective, but you have to stick at it because old habits come back very, very quickly if you don't keep discipline and keep yourself focused. So it's not everybody slips uh, now and again. Everybody goes back into bad habits. That's not, no, and some people were dealt a rotten hand. Okay, so I'm not saying that that's, uh, so I'm not telling you it's your fault. But if there are things that are happening in your life you don't like, you can and you should make efforts to number one, figure out what's causing it, and number two, change it. Okay. So that's one of the purposes of astrology. It's also used as a tool in terms of spiritual self-development. It's also used as a tool to bring about the greatest happiness for the individual. And it's also used as a way of changing perspective, figuring out, essentially giving you a broader view of life and what factors are happening and what you can expect, what obstacles or what assists you can expect in life. So sometimes you'll have to carry the burden all by yourself. Other times you'll have a lot of help. And that's important to understand. That's important. It's important to know when you can rely on other people and when you have to rely on yourself. Okay, so those are some of the basics of why we even look at astrology. Okay, so it's not really to just do readings and say, "Oh yes, your life is miserable. Now give me your money." It's really to change a person's life, to at least give them the tools to understand what's happening and the perspective to change their life for the better. And it's never too late to change. There are certain things in my life I'm still looking to change, and I'm close to, I don't know if I'm close to the end, but I'm up there in years. So let's look at, also, I did want to tell you, I am working on a book. I've had numerous delays through the years, not excusing. So a book is on the way. I've had certain interruptions happen, and again, that's my fault. It's not. It's nobody else's responsibility. And I also have a school which is starting to go into drive. I do individual tutoring in Vedic astrology and a variety of other subjects. And I have, just in order to give you a little bit more of my resume, I've spoken on Vedic astrology since 1990. I say since around 1993, 1994. I've written and spoken about it. I've been published in Mountain Astrologer, uh, in books in India, or in magazines in India, excuse me. And I've done lectures for groups from India and ashrams in the United States, and organizations in the United States, astrological organizations in the United States, and in England and in Turkey. So um, I've been around for a while, and I just want to share this knowledge with you. I will be making more frequent recordings this summer, as soon as we get certain essentials taken care of. And I will also be increasing the frequency of recordings posted. Okay, so without further ado, let's go on to look at the chart. So this is the chart for when I first, this is a chart for now, July 30th. This was pull up around 5:10. It's right around 5:25 now, so I can update it. Five. So I'll make it a now chart. And this brings us actually to a nicer chart, a somewhat nicer chart. So what we have here is this chart kind of parallels the United States chart, interestingly enough. Let me stop the share, because I've learned on Zoom that sometimes these things don't show up right away, and you have to try them a couple of times in order to get them to work. All right, so we're gonna stop it one more time, and we'll look and see what's happening the astrology chart right now. So this is a system called Prashna, where we actually try to do a reading based upon the time the question is asked. So how is the world doing is the question that you're asked. And right now, because of the way this chart is set up, we have a Sagittarius rising. So these are all uh, trying to think of a good way to put it. These are all signs. So this is Pisces, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and our old friend Aquarius. So Aquarius is the third house. Sagittarius is the first house, which is what we're talking about right now. So we're talking about knowledge. And because Jupiter's in the house of knowledge, that little underline under Jupiter means Jupiter is now retrograde. It was stationary direct last week, and stationary direct Jupiter's and weak Saturn's also retrograde, as you can see from the chart, tend to do very little. They tend to think about things, but they tend to, it's just sort of like stairs in space. So if you have a lot of retrograde planets in the chart, it'll be tough to make what I would call further progress. It would be tough to make progress which is sustainable. But also the stationary directs tend to freeze things in time. They go through a certain sequence uh, where you're thinking about what you want and you read it and you discover new things. You discover new things, and but I think the main thing is that when planets are stationary direct, you're able to realign your priorities and say, oh yeah, I want to do this instead of that. You know, I want to do. You start both with Jupiter. You start both taking yourself out of boxes you put yourself into, and you figure out new strategies or new ways to get to either learn or to increase your presence or to increase what you can do or what you can learn. So I think that the Jupiter retrogrades are kind of interesting in that you'll see all kinds of like really innovative thinking during Jupiter retrogrades that you hadn't seen, you wouldn't normally see in a chart. It doesn't mean a lot of them are workable. That's one of the problems. Or it doesn't mean that a lot of people will necessarily agree with the thinking, but they're new. When Saturn goes retrograde, which it has been for a few weeks right now, you'll start to see some progress kind of unfurl. You'll start to see people um, moving backwards and essentially kind of deconstructing progress they've made. So they're not quite ready to go to the next step. And one of the reasons we're seeing in this chart Saturn retrograde, and Saturn retrograde is actually aspecting Jupiter, and both Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars are all aspecting the sun, which is the representative of the government. I'll speak that more directly about that in a few minutes. Is that you'll see a lot of unhappiness or discontent with government, with and a lot of pessimism because Saturn's aspecting the planet of optimism, which is Jupiter. Jupiter is inherently an optimistic planet, and that everything can be worked out through regular means and regular strategies. Um, Jupiter retrograde indicates you have to think a little bit differently or think a little bit outside the box in order to make progress, which is fine. You know, I actually have a Jupiter retrograde in my birth chart, so it actually feels relatively normal to me. When I'm looking at the rest of the world and Jupiter's direct, I'm like, they all seem kind of crazy to me. It just seems kind of boring. Jupiter retrograde is like, yeah, this is something new. Let's try this. So that's my individual personality. Other people are more like, well, let's do things step by step by step. And I think when you see these kinds of changes, you'll usually see big reversals or big changes in direction when you see reversals. And the Saturn reversal into Capricorn means that we're going to back off from some of the more societal reform initiatives that we've seen taken, or you'll see a different approach being taken to those. You'll see them being sort of downplayed. If Jupiter's retrograde, then you'll see people reversing positions they've been taking for a long time. You can see that in the case of both the current administration and the people associated with the previous administration. So you'll see a lot of shifts and saying, well, maybe I should say something else, or maybe I should do something else. So this is a fascinating time to watch. It's a time when people's ethics sort of go like, not their ethics, but their positions sort of change. They'll basically they're basically Saturn retrograde is kind of a backpedaling position, but it's also detrimental to the economy because what it tends to do is it tends to make us more pessimistic that the progress we've made hasn't really made much impact. If Saturn's aspecting Jupiter, the optimism that we can change things is except through doing something really unusual isn't there. So when you see changes like that, and I don't want to just focus on those two planets, but they're important both for the economy, for essentially there's a lot of talk about recession now, and also for um, inflation. So inflation has, as soon as Saturn went retrograde, inflation did back down a little bit, but it's still there. It's still a component, and it's interesting to watch the planets because as Saturn goes retrograde, the price of things will drop, but also the expectations of economic expansion will also decline along with that. And that's the Jupiter retrograde. So the Mars Rahu combination, and again, this isn't unique to the United States, this is a worldwide phenomenon. The Mars Rahu combination is actually really one of the most fascinating ones you can see in the chart, because essentially what that means basically is that Mars is in its own sign along with Rahu. Now, Rahu's never satisfied. It's never completely in compliance, and it's a bit of a disruptive planet. So that means disruptors on both sides have a lot of energy. On both the right and the left have a lot of energy right now. That'll probably peak over the next couple of weeks. You'll see it peak between August, roughly right now, and August 12th. Mars goes into Taurus around August 12th to 13th. So if any of you have encountered really rude people or really aggressive people, a lot of that behavior they'll turn into stubborn people, but they won't be rude and aggressive. And I think one of the things that happens when this combination occurs is that people get very impatient, get very frustrated if things aren't happening according to a schedule, aren't happening according to the rate at which they want to see them happen. And again, that's what we've seen happen a lot around the world. It's also a perfect combination for war, which we have right now. The Mars Rahu transit to Taurus, if we're lucky, will end the Ukraine war, but I don't think it will. I think that's with us. I think that's a Saturn phenomenon. I think it's with us until next January. So we're still going to see this kind of like compression of pricing probably until next April sometime, and these supply chain problems until around that time when Jupiter moves to the next sign, and it'll be in the company of Rahu. So there'll be again problems with supply, but not of the same kind. And Saturn will be aspecting Jupiter as well. So again, we're still not really out of the woods economically. It doesn't mean everybody's going to suffer equally. So I mean, I just want to give you assurances of that. It doesn't mean the world's going to fall over and collapse. But over the next few days, in particular, next couple of weeks, be careful driving, be careful with your temper, be careful with how you address and interact with people, because most people will be very short-tempered, and as a matter of fact, they'll feel at its most intense around August 1st and August 2nd, but there'll still be some blowback after that, really through around the 12th. So forewarned is forewarned. Venus is very well placed in Gemini. Everybody's a little bit flirty, a little bit happy, a little bit more sociable right now. Mercury's in Cancer. It's interesting that this chart reflects the U.S. chart that I use so much, because Sagittarius is a rising sign in the U.S. chart that I like, and Mercury's in the 8th house in the U.S. chart that I like. Now, Mercury is connected with communication, okay? Mercury's also connected with Rahu in the U.S. chart that I use, and essentially what that tends to mean to me is that the Mercury is essentially communications. It's essentially the ruler of the press. So Mercury Rahu combinations usually means the press can't get enough. They can't really, they're overly greedy for attention. Okay, let's put it that way. And this is both sides of the spectrum. These are people who are kind of not people, corporations. They're businesses, right? So when you see the latest news headline treating every news event like a four-alarm fire, it's important to realize that the media needs viewership. We live in a commercial media society. I had a professor when I was in journalism who used to talk about media theories, and they had one that was based upon sea cultures and one that was based upon land cultures. And land cultures were very even and very communication flow, but nobody ever got really excited about it. So if you think about, like, let's say, like the Midwest or even large parts of the world which are on solid plains, like even Europe for that matter, nobody ever gets really agitated about news. Things are essentially, they know that they're going to have to get up in the morning um, and and till the fields and do whatever work they have to do. That's just a given. So they're not going to get really excited. Sea cultures, on the other hand, they're much more dynamic. They're much more exchange based. And as a matter of fact, Mercury sits in Cancer, so he was actually pretty good for a guy who didn't know astrology. But they're based upon emotional exchanges, and they're based upon fast news changes, and they're based upon fast changes in culture and a lot of activity. So if you think about New York and Los Angeles, essentially the East Coast and the West Coast of the United States, or England, or Paris, which are essentially close to the water. Spain and Portugal, those were the dominant, in Japan, those are the dominant countries right now, and China, which has a large sea coast as well. You'll see a lot of activity based around emotional news and fear and dread and manipulation of emotion. And that's what the news media in our country does. Now, again, I'm not saying they're wrong to do this. I'm just describing style. Okay, so they're not going to say. So the news presentation won't be even. It'll be more crisis oriented because there's so much competition nowadays for our attention. So that Mercury is in Cancer right now. It is where it is natally in the U.S. chart. Moon's in the ninth house. This does indicate change in governments. Doesn't necessarily mean change in the United States governments, but at least change in perspective. And K2's in the 11th house. So again, a lot of people can't trust their friends, or their friends will act a little bit crazy. Now, if we look at the world map, so the Mars Rahu is a little bit dangerous in terms of things like earthquakes, tidal waves, volcanoes, things like that. we'd have to look at certain parts of the world and see whether or not those particular countries have lines from these planets going over them to figure out whether or not they're going to be affected by that. And that's why I do the second part. So again, it's this distrust in government. Government's kind of hidden away. It's August. They're not really going to be. It's kind of a slow news season right now because of the because of recesses. And Mars also aspects Mercury. So um, hate to say it so bluntly, but you'll also know that news is lying from both perspectives. So they're telling. So news is a way of telling a story. There's no way listening to that story, whether you know that story is the truth or a lie. You're just being told a story. And I encourage people to keep that energy for at least the next couple of months because Mars is, we'll get a break for maybe about a week and a half where we'll get basically, solid, honest reporting, and we'll come back around mid-August again. So this is just to warn you a little bit, to arm you a little bit for the show. And again, this isn't criticizing news people. This is what I was once interested in news until I saw the way it was evolving. I was once a journalism major until I saw the way it was evolving, and I went, I don't think I can go into that field. And I really wanted to because I thought I was I thought I would be doing a good thing. And I just looked and said, nope, I don't think I can do it. So let's go over here. And this was a long time ago. This isn't recent. This was a long time. So let's go over here and look at the time and space chart. Oops, I'm sorry, guys. All right, so this is kind of a small map. Let me see if I can expand it. Oh, yeah, I can do that. It doesn't seem to stay. I'm not sure why. So let's do this again. All right. So if we look over here around Alaska, we see a Venus and a Jupiter line going through Alaska. So nothing really to get upset about there. Jupiter's kind of a friendly planet, but there may be more drug addiction in Hawaii and Alaska currently than normal. That's one of the indicators of Venus-Jupiter combinations. Mars and Rahu are passing relatively. They're not really interfering with anything until they get up to basically the northeast and or the northwest, excuse me, the northwest and around the Vancouver region of Canada. So look for scandals or political upsets in that part of the country. Also, down here, you have a Rahu line going up through California, all the way through Montana, all the way through central, or through roughly west central Canada. And you'll also see some political scandals happening around there. But the news coverage will come more from this part of the world. Okay. There's a change in leadership around Nevada, Arizona. Yeah, it looks like it's coming. And also, the moon is in the second house, so some additional money coming into those parts of the country. Also into Baja California. If we go down here, we're not seeing a lot of lines through the central United States, which is good, although it is and is contained by a moon Jupiter, is involved by a moon Jupiter lines. So that looks actually fairly good. It looks fairly peaceful. It doesn't mean you won't get outbreaks of violence in certain parts of the country because of that Mars-Rahu combination. And I think especially just extrapolating this part is vulnerable through central Texas, Oklahoma, and Wisconsin is vulnerable to violence and changes in leadership. The other part where you're going to see a lot of ethical probes will probably be around Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, through Ohio, and Pennsylvania. I actually wouldn't be surprised to see some interesting facts come out of the Pennsylvania Senate race. And I don't know which side they'll fall on, but you'll see some kind of interesting things because of the political representation in that race. The other thing is there's a Venus line heading over a Jupiter line, drug problems in Panama, maybe some flooding in Panama, maybe some flooding in Ecuador and Peru. That's the detrimental part to Venus. Venus causes rains, and Jupiter will cause big rains or big floods. So not every benefic planet is good. If we go up through here, Iceland has a Venus line running through it, and this Venus line runs all the way down through Southeast Asia, what used to be called Indochina. So we'll get to that in a second. But we also have a sun line running up through close to Iceland, and a Mercury and a Saturn line running up through England. So this indicates some economic problems in England, Spain, Portugal, West Africa, Brazil to a certain extent. Governmental authorities really been problematic in Brazil, and some flooding definitely in Brazil and Argentina down here. But the United Kingdom has a Mercury line running through it, so it's going to be big news, especially around Liverpool and Scott and Edinburgh, and also in Norway. There's a Venus line running through France right now, should be good for it again. So that should cool off the rains a little bit. That should be good, or cool off the fires a little bit, excuse me. And down through here, you have a Jupiter line running through Italy, Germany, and Finland, and Sweden. Actually, Sweden. Finland's over here. And I think what this shows is there's going to be a little bit of a governmental scandal reaching down into Germany, Denmark, Belgium, and even Sweden, and all the way down to Turkey. Maybe even some violence in Turkey. I'm hoping there's not an earthquake in Turkey, just because that Mars-Rahu line can cause panic over earthquakes or through line changes. But certainly near Istanbul and a little bit to the west, there's some violence indicated and some governmental displeasure indicated because this is really close to Ankara. The other lines down here are down through Saudi Arabia, down through Sudan, down into the region that used to be called, or the region that's down near Mozambique and down near Madagascar. And again, we're looking at governmental problems in those parts of the world. The government will be under a lot of stress, um, you know, for both not doing enough and doing too much. So whenever you see a sun line in these charts, the government's under some stress. And it will be until at least August 15th, and probably a little bit beyond that. Because Saturn's doing, trying to think of a good way to describe it. Planets that are retrograde are really strong, and they cast aspects from the signs behind them. So just because Saturn won't be directly aspecting the sun doesn't mean it won't do some damage in the chart. So this is a doubly strong Saturn transit. Pressure on Iran, pressure on Russia as well. Some economic pressure on the Ukraine. Again, not surprising consider the fact that there's a war out there. And this Mars Saturn line, there'll be a lot of news about it, but again, not as much as when the war first started. And again, you've seen how that's receded into just to make my point about the news, you've seen how that's receded into the background because of the risk of new disease outbreaks, inflation, and also obviously the January 6th hearings in the United States. And so all news for any country is local news. So a lot of it, so we're not going to be quite as concerned about, let's say, problems in the Middle East, although they're going to affect us eventually, and problems in Iran, which are going to affect us eventually. But we are going to be concerned about doing the right thing in the United States. That Jupiter line is like obsessed with that. So, but this is interesting because it's hitting what I would call a lot of red states, not blue states. Let's go over here. I don't want to spend too much time on that. So this part of the world will get a great deal of attention between Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan. Nothing's running over India, which is a little bit of a relief for India. They've had continuing problems. And right now, Venus is, but there's a little bit of a panic going on. And a lot of popular discontent in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Jupiter and Venus in conjunction over Cambodia, Laos, and that will affect Myanmar, and that'll affect rain. So it's going to be a very difficult rainy season over here. And there's a Mars Rahu line. I'm going to talk about the sun line over here. So governments will be very, very strict or very stringent, but there's a very strong over China and over Taiwan. So you may see China make a move on Taiwan before the summer is out. We'll see. I hope not. Mars and Rahu are intersecting with Mercury over Japan, southern tip of Japan, and also over New Guinea, and also over Australia. So we should see some violence or some aggressive activities over those parts of the world over the next few months, maybe some governmental scandals. And finally, Mercury's running over eastern Australia. Saturn's, that'll cause more coverage over Australia. And finally, the moon and Saturn are hitting New Zealand, and the New Zealand government, I've heard some rumors the New Zealand government is trying to manage news. Lately, they've been trying to suppress suppress information. And I'm not sure that I got the story right, but it's more like it's more like along the lines, if we tell you it's true, it's true, which is essentially, it's responsible government, but it's it's also very Orwellian when you think about it. So I think you're going to see the struggle over control of communication over the next couple of years in particular. So we're moving away, the United States is moving away from a Saturn subgrid, Saturn influence subgrid. We're going to be moving more towards a Mercury influence subgrid. And that'll be both good and bad because we're going to be getting a lot of what I would call questionable information, even more so than we're getting now. So that's unfortunate. And one of the reasons I don't like it is because it'll stop us from making our own decisions. And there'll be sort of an information war. It'll be ramped up over the next couple of years, especially after January of next year. But it'll also open up some truth, and we'll get to final answers on some of these things probably within the next couple of years. But I think whenever you have crisis situations, you don't get the full story until like years. I was a history person for a long time, and you never get the full story of what's happening. You don't get it in history, but you don't get other perspectives until it's it's sometimes like years, sometimes decades later. So that's one of the things that's always fascinating me about history. You have you have a snapshot, and the snapshot is, think about it as being this like really nice picture. It's cropped up on a green screen, and the background looks totally different. Okay, or this really bad picture, um, but the background is totally different. So essentially, what you're getting is a perspectual image versus quote unquote the whole story. So, and this is done for a variety of reasons. It's not necessarily done because people are evil. It's mainly done as a means of controlling communications. And as I said, everybody does it. It's not unique to one party or another. So people are messaging. That's what politicians say when they're messaging. They're essentially telling you their story and their perspective, and they're expecting you to follow them or pay attention to them because they're right. And clearly, there are certain situations in which one side is wrong and the other side is correct. But as I grow older, it gets tougher and tougher for me to tell who's right and who's wrong. That's just me. All right. So it's the ending of Orwell's Animal Farm. If anybody's read Animal Farm, some pigs and some humans have gotten into a card game, and the animals were looking. It was a rough analog for Stalinist Russia, and the animals were looking at the humans and the pigs, and they keep looking and they can't tell. And in the end, they can't tell one from the other. They keep looking at who's arguing, and they can't tell one from the other. I just thought it was an interesting. It's a kid's parable, but it's really fascinating. So, enough of that. Let's see how the planets are going to affect you. But just keep your eyes and ears open. Keep an open mind, and that's all I can ask. And that's all I can ask for you. It'll help in the long run. The Aries has Mars and Rahu in the first house, Venus is in the third. a good month or a good week overall for Aries. You'll have some expenses connected with education, but and some disagreements with wife, but not bad. Taurus has Venus in the second house, a lot of career growth and ambition, a lot of financial success, some caution about diseases. Saturn aspects Jupiter, so some financial gains with a lot of work. Gemini is very social this month, or this week, very aggressive, very outward-going, changeable in terms of its desires, not really consistent, which is unusual for, which is usually the case for Gemini. And K2's in the fifth house. Children will be a little bit unpredictable or a little bit annoying. Saturn aspects Jupiter. Career life will be good, but they'll have to put a lot of work into it. And Mars and Rahu, they'll have interesting or famous friends. Cancer moves in the second house. So this is a good Dhyana Yoga. Cancer should have a good month for money. It'll spend a lot, but it'll have a good month for money. But also have some difficulty with relationships. Relationship partners will seem to be going back to their old ways. They'll seem to pull back a little bit. Good luck, good career success and fame, not enough in their minds, and some expenses connected with career. Leo has Moon in the first house. Lord of the first is in the 12th. It's basically a good combination for this sign, and essentially you have an exchange of lords between the first and the 12th house, so they'll get a lot of money, but they'll feel grateful to have it. Venus is in the 11th house, new and good friends. K2's in the third, a lot of bravery. Saturn's in the sixth. They'll have to watch out about exhausting themselves. Really interested in digging below the surface. And Mars and Rahu are in the ninth. A lot of luck, but again, it won't feel like it's enough. For Virgo has Jupiter in the 7th house, Venus in the 10th, Mercury, Sun in the 11th, and Moon in the 12th. So a lot of financial gains for this sign, a lot of hard work, but a lot of financial gains. For Libra has that Mars Rahu, so there's been a lot of fights with relationship partners lately, but those will pass within a couple of weeks. Venus is in the 9th house, which is a very good placement for it, for at least for another 10 days or so. And then it'll be in the 10th house of career. So this sign should do pretty well around mid-August. And I hate to keep doing that. But they will have some trouble being understood. They'll tend to be ignored, or they'll be exhausted more often than normal. And Saturn is aspecting Jupiter, creates kind of a Raj Yoga for this chart. It'll give some ability to act on skills in a logical and sane way. For Scorpio has Mars and Rahu in the 6th house. That's good because it allows them to defeat their enemies, no matter how strong they may be. Saturn's in the 3rd house. It'll give the sign a lot of courage. Jupiter's in the 5th. It'll give them a lot of financial credit from the past. Venus is in the 8th. It'll make them seem very attractive. Sun and Mercury are in the 9th. Very good for career success. Moon is in the 10th. Again, good for career success. Some losses, though, because of friendships. Sagittarius has Saturn in the 2nd, so financially it will seem to be a little bit uncertain of itself. Jupiter's in the 4th. It sure can get out of it if it can think its way out of it. And also this will provide a little bit more stability over the next 4 months. Mars and Rahu are in the 5th house. He's probably been feeling a little bit angry about his luck recently. It shouldn't be so, but it is. And essentially this combination will change within about a couple of weeks, and it'll be more friendly. For Venus is in the 7th, attractive relationship partners. Sun and Mercury are in the 8th, some confidence problems. Moon is in the 9th, good luck for the chart. K2's in the 11th, can't trust your friends. Saturn's in the 1st house for Capricorn. It aspects the 3rd house, Jupiter, and Mars and Rahu are in the 4th house, so this will give some relationship problems to the sign. It'll attract intelligent people who will want you to know their opinion, but this is normally not a good combination for domestic bliss. Venus is in the 6th house, so relationship partners will seem to be enemies. Moon is in the 8th. There will also be some difficulty with relationship partners this week. K2 is in the 10th. So again, now like career recognition, but we've gone down this road before having the Capricorn. Aquarius has Jupiter in the 2nd house, has Lord of the 11th and the 2nd, but aspected by Saturn, so there'll be expenses connected with home and also with bills that are due. And finally, Mars sits in the 3rd house, very good placement. Venus sits in the 5th house, very, very good for relationship. Sun is in the 6th house, so some difficulties with leaders. Moon is in the 7th, some changeability in relationship life. And K2 is in the 8th, some interest in metaphysics or spirituality. Finally, Pisces, good placement, Jupiter in the 1st house, aspected by Saturn. Mars is in the 2nd house, good for money. Venus is in the 4th house. Home life is relatively happy. Mercury and Sun are in the 5th house. Children are and past life credit are strong. Moon's in the 6th. There's a lot of anxiety or worry in the sign. K2 was in the 8th. And Saturn's in the 11th. So that gives a lot of research and a lot of ability to pull in money from old friends. So that's it for this week. I have to run. As always, it's been a pleasure seeing you. Please, if you haven't so far, subscribe. I'm looking to drive a membership, and you can contact me at 508-525-0001. Thanks a lot. I love you all. God bless.